favorite song. And while the song talks about a lover he left behind and longing for that lover is really home, country, and nation that was lost to my father. And the third line, and if you're interested in the lyrics, the translation, if you have your QR code in the back of the program, you'll see, I think you can see that because it's hard to see up there. And the last third verse is particularly poignant because he talks about 10 years of servitude, thinking about his 10 years of servitude, which fills him with deep sorrow. And all he can do is hold the blooming azaleas that keeps blooming, even if he's lost his homeland. It reminds him of home, and he cries.
Hi, y'all. I'm Peter. Okay, thanks. As a third generation biracial person of Japanese descent, it's a very special honor for me to get to sing this song with Dr. Pak. While I have had to negotiate the harmful ways that our country, America, has treated Japanese Americans, at the same time, if I'm to claim my Japanese heritage, I must speak out against the wrongs of the imperialism of Japan, too. To this day, the government of Japan has not made amends that it owes to the people of Korea, and it has not atoned for the abuse of comfort women during World War II. Comfort women is a euphemism, and a 1996 UN report made it more clear that what these women in Korea really were military sex slaves who were forced to work in brothels. It is estimated that 200,000 Korean women were forced into this role during the war. Japan has used its clout to silence efforts to bring recompense to these women before the last of their generation pass away. China, Taiwan, Philippines, and even the Netherlands have also brought cases against Japan for this. For me to be able to sing this song today in Korean is not only for me to speak out against Japan's military abuses, but it also sheds light into the complex identities that we as the AAPI community must navigate this far away from our own country of origin. Thank you for being here today and for being a part of this very special AAPI Arts Festival, and we hope you enjoy this piece. 바위 고개 운다구 혼자 남자니 예님이 그리워 눈물 납니다. 고개 위에 숨어서 기다리다니 그리워 눈물 납니다. 바위 고개 핀 것 진달래 거수 죽여 저도 피언저 니만 가고 없어도 잘도 피었네 니만 가고 없어도 잘도 피었네 박의 고래 운다고 혼자 남자니 예님이 그리워 하도 그리워 10여 년가 맞삼살이 살아라 진도의 것 안고서 눈물 납니다. Thank you, Dr. Pak.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Whew. Next, we have Vinoto Shohei. We'll be singing 2 songs, and I'll let Vino just introduce the songs himself. We're starting with this one. This one, this one. Which one first?
Hello, Chip. This is my first time standing in front of the people here at Union, so I'm a little bit nervous as well. And it's not that I often sing. If I go off track, if my voice go haywire, please excuse me. But as I sing this song, the first song called Hamunu Kupu, as I sing this song, I wanted to remind each and every one of us that we are all unique, we are all different, and we are all special. And I just wanted you all to feel special as I sing this song. Alokum laki julo, akum zapuke. Alokum laki julo, aki chihipuke. Alo no 다시 로게 기미리 감라 알로 그트 로사스 흘러 오주 기비 후에 감은 누구부터이 아예 리할로 주기 비도이 그무그하 알로금 라키 줄로 아금 잡을게 알로금 라키 줄로 아끼 지해볼게 궁미는 너 주위게 기미리 감라 오주 기위 지스트 벨로 오주 기위 후에 감은 누구부터이 아예 리할로 주기 비토이 그무그하 녹음과 뜨거예 오죽기 비후게 너의 꿈수도 제니마 너의 로시김 티제니마 오죽기 비패스 로죽구 부실로 오죽기 비후에 아무 누구부터이 아예 리할로 주기 비도이 그무그하 오죽기 비후에 아무 누구부터이 아예 리할로 주기 비도이 I just forgot to mention that I'm Vinoto and I'm from Nagaland. It's in the northeastern part of India. And the song that I'm singing right now is from my own dialect. I'm from indigenous community, and it's from a Sumi dialect. I'm from a Sumi tribe. And this shawl is my own traditional shawl. I just wanted to say that. The second song, it's a open call and an invitation that let's all participate in building peace, in building unity. Let's all love each other. What has brought division among us? How long are we going to live like this? Let us live as one. Salakipe staloksa Puto jom lori meno chito Itmi ko veksa lo noka Chỉ mẹ mini ri khachi Ove kium pe khokum suju aye Nagami ye kimi ye kile khairi Kiu no ningu dolo ki je vetsuke Kulaki shipes no niushini Kum tsui rilo Samiko no irilo Nagami rengu no puturoni Huakeu no jelo no Tokulu pes niushini Obekyum pe hokum suju aye Nagami kimi e kile kheri Kiu no ningu dolo ki je vetsuke Kulaki shipes no niushini Kum tsui rilo Kipi kum nashini keu Vengu no irilo Salawoka vempilo Qui vit par est pour tout l'uni. Ovekyum pe khokum seju aye Nagami ye kimi ye kile khairi Kiu no ningu dolo ki je vetsuke Kulaki shipes no niushini Let us leave as one Thank you.
All right. Let's see who's next. Next, we have Dr. Pak back up for some poetry. And please, please welcome Dr. Pak. Yes, and if you'd like to look in your program, the poems are under Dr. Pak's bio. You can read along, but we'll also just be listening.
You can look at it after I read it, but not during, if possible. So the first poem is called George Washington Bridge, year 1976, year 2002. So my practice of writing poetry is more like a spiritual practice. It is a way I try to make meaning of what's happening of my life, explore various things, and through poetry I find what I didn't know before. So that's how I write, well, why I write poetry. So I'll read the George Washington Bridge. By the time my parents were naturalized from being an alien, holding an alien registration card, AKA green card, I was too old to be included in their application. My two younger sisters became citizens of the United States of America through my parents' change of allegiance to this adopted country, singing, "Oh, say, can you see?" rather than 동해 물가백 두산이. After 5 years of being in this country, they were eligible to apply to be a citizen. So they did without a second to spare, studying for the oral civics test of 10 questions that the immigration officer will ask to answer perfectly and correctly in English. With so many questions to study, 100 to be exact, my mother banded together with her friends over cups of tea and skillfully peeled fruit, finding mnemonics to remember the answers. Question: who was the first president of the United States? Answer: George Washington Bridge. Question: which president freed the slaves? Answer: Lincoln Tunnel. And so on, they studied, they memorized, they reported back to each other of their experiences of the interview with new strategies gained to share. One of my mother's friends confessed. She confessed to my mother about her interview, who struggled until the officer asked, who was the first president of the United States? Confident of the answer, she replied with relief, George Washington Bridge. Laughter arose as my mother and her friend recounted the tale of humiliation, swallowing the bitter bile with sips of self-deprecating humor, absolving her wayward infraction. 25 years later, to fix my alien status, I applied to be naturalized, to be tamed and domesticated, to become a native. Studying the 100 civics questions for the interview, I recalled George Washington Bridge, marveling at my mother and her friends' tenacity to learn of their adopted land. On the day of the interview, standing in line after line, shuttled around here and there like cattle, I finally faced the officer in a small, nondescript interview room. Reviewing my files, my credentials, my degrees, my employment, apologetically, at least I thought, he says, I have to ask this of everyone. Can you write for me in English, I pay my taxes on time? With swelling compassion for this man, I quietly comply. On a plain piece of paper he pushes toward me, I write in my best cursive script. Then the questions flowed. Who is the President of the United States? Vice President. I responded with trepidation in case somehow I misspeak or have a stage fright, as this process is wont to do, to question one's worthiness to become a citizen of the United States of America, infantilizing me back to 5th grade, age 10, when I first landed on this soil. Who was the first president of the United States? He asks. Smiling to myself as I remembered my mother's friend's response, George Washington Bridge, which stealthily breaks loose from my thoughts into speech, widening his eyes with confusion, assessing whether I was being funny, rude, or disrespectful, like a tough, unmasticated piece of meat that escapes my mouth. I try to explain this untamed memory. I take a deep breath and begin. Let me tell you a story. I regale him with the stories of my mother and her friends, not caring what he was thinking or feeling, whether he wished for this interview to be over, my energy picking up as I went on and on, ancestors speaking through me whose stories needed to be told, not only to each other, but to this officer. I come home and call my sister. I tell her about the interview. You wouldn't believe what I did. And before I could say anything, she exclaims incredulously, "No, you didn't. No, you didn't say George Washington Bridge." Laughter cackling through the phone line, laughter joined by my mother and her friend, connecting us through time and space, these memories lodged in our sinews and our bones, breathing new life into them. Thank you. The second poem I want to read to you is called Hwangap. Hwangap is 60th birthday, and Koreans believed that when you turn 60, you've done 5 cycles of 12 years. So you've come back to you've lived your life, your full life, and then in a sense, it's a new beginning. So in this poem, I explore my birth and my mother's death as like bookends. My mother had Alzheimer's. She passed away 5 years ago. I was the primary caretaker for her, and through working and caring for her Alzheimer's, I learned to understand a lot more about life. So this is an exploration of pulling together my mother's story, my birth, my mother's death, and my 60th rebirth. And I juxtapose it with Psalm 139. So Hwangap, Psalm 139. A cold soul winter's night, a midwife arrives at a small storefront pharmacy with big letters, Dongyang Yakguk, that claims its presence, jostling to be noticed among other brightly colored signs. To deliver a baby, not their first child, but second. The first, the son, was born not in the back of a pharmacy, but in a hospital, just to be sure. They couldn't take the chance. Post-war Korea, in a poor and striving quarter, in a room heated by a round coal briquet from below, nowadays they call it radiant heat for luxury homes, into a world petrified by war and devastation, into a family torn, having strayed, not by choice, far from the ancestral home, consumed by a hungry ghost, a will to survive because to do anything less would mean death. Like so many other shadowed lives, gutted and emptied, feasting on indigestible memories and stories they tell themselves, I am still a yangban. Soft and small body of an infant with life force gentle, but enough to break through the concrete of immeasurable suffering. Ready or not, it is time. And with the rhythm of her mother's body, her head thrusts out a shock of jet black hair and eyes that shone like black diamonds. 8:10 a.m., she takes her first cold breath. Inhale. The sun already in the sky greets this life. Exhale. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I never could ask my mother whether her heart was full to behold her first daughter, whether for a moment she brushed away her grief to make room but this tiny creature teeming with possibility, whether she promised herself, as you are wont to in these miraculous moments, to choose life over and over again. I never could ask, because I knew of her sadness, the oozing wound of loss that festered during her pregnancy, of her needing her mother, clutching desperately to that invisible umbilical cord. Instead, inconsolable sorrow and regret as her twin companion, as she recalls, how can she not, the grief gale to be buried with her mother at the gravesite. They had to hold her back from throwing herself onto the coffin. This heaven-crumbling sorrow, I fed on it as I grew inside her. For it was you who formed my inner parts. Sinews and bones, heart, eyes, hands, toes. With silver thread of sorrow, I was woven into a tapestry, not mine, and not mine. You knit me together in my mother's womb. As I approach 60, my mother feeds me yet again for the impending birth after the 12-year cycle is completed. 9 months of gestation becomes 9 years in her miraculous procreative womb, not the old and dried up one you would expect from an 80-year-old, as I remain in her Alzheimer's world until, ready or not, it is time. With the rhythm of her body, I am pushed out, reborn, a motherless child. 5:40 p.m., she takes her final warm breath. Inhale. The sun still in the sky, the moon preparing to rise, greets this well-lived life. Exhale. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I need not ask her, because I know it in my bones, what it is in her bones. Grief, yes. Sorrow, yes. Trauma, oh yes. Still, I hear her songs. I move to the dance of her body. I delight in the simple sweetness of vanilla ice cream. I rehearse, yes, I have everything I need, over and over again. And I learn to live like a child taking her first step, shakily, tentatively, in the present. The past and future no longer accessible to her, she teaches me to live in the moment. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Joy, laughter, delight, and love that burrow in her body like comfort food that knows even if she forgets. This odds-defying love, I fed on it as I grew inside her. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Not a cold soul night, but an unseasonably warm November day. I walk the bridge across the Mahi Kantak, the river that flows both ways, according to the Lenape people, bridging two worlds like the river that communes in two directions, surrounded by stunning autumnal beauty with colors dancing, waving, clapping in the wind, held by my partner's fathomless love. I breathe. Inhale, exhale. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pak. Next, we have poetry from Dabin Jong, who is currently in Korea, so she's not here with us. However, she did send a recording of her own reading of her poems. And I will play that and I will show her poems on the screen. You can also read it on the QR program as well. It might be hard to see, realizing the screen is a little small. But as you pull that up, I'll begin by reading her bio and description. Dabin Jong, she there, is a poet, translator, editor, and art historian who explores East Asian representation, Asian American identity, post-colonialism, and the immigrant experience through creative and academic praxis. Her poem, My Mother's Sisters, 3, won the Chestnut Review's 2021 Stubborn Writers Contest, selected by Dorothy Chan. Their works appeared or are forthcoming in the Indiana Review, Chestnut Review, Per Happen Mag, and Chogwa Zine. She's also a poetry editor at the Hanok Review. About her art. Lucia Brock-Boydos once said, "My theory is that a poem is troubled into its making. It's not like a thing that blooms. It's a thing that wounds. I'd a terror I could tell to none, as Dickinson would say. My multi-layered displacement unfolds in front of her. Asian in America, times immigrant, times female, times queer Presbyterian, equals displacement quadrupled. These poems have been written for the last 2 years, when the violence against Asians in the United States began to surface. All responding to a certain kind of tragedy that happened to the Asian and Pacific Islander community all over the world, the Korean War, the volcanic eruption in Tonga, the recent death of Michelle Go on the New York subway station, and the 2001 Atlanta spa shootings. These poems embody the pain through which Asian and Pacific Islanders had to live. It is my only hope to create something that is as hopeful, meaningful, beautiful, and resilient as the perseverance of the people, and to offer a space of utmost comfort for all to be remembered and free to be let go. One second.
Emily Jong Min Yoon, hello, Miss Pretty Bitch. Wartime hunger. After Emily Jong Min Yoon, hello, Miss Pretty Bitch. Kibumi chocolate with wartime hunger laugh as they choose. You ask me if I can imagine my grandmother following American trucks, the soldiers, and asking Kibumi chocolate, or she's too old for that, than any of my mother's sisters. If I can imagine them making war soup or army soup, laughing as they were given chocolate, their faces lighting up in the prospect of rare sweetness for their wartime hunger of the soul. My friend asked me if it's real a war soup, and I say that's what I crave the most being in the United States. It is not complete without the wartime hunger and desperation of digging through the trash of the American army, finding spam and beans and all the things they wouldn't eat or anything. If you ask me if I can imagine my grandmother boiling scavenged wartime soup for the wartime hunger, I can't, because it was not given to me. Brilliant, gone, after Fanny Choi. Every law is written with the tears of the bereaved only because they're never transparent but black that rolls through every edge. I rediscovered 3 words from my tears: floating, brilliant, gone, and reminded how easy it is for a body to fling without a screech, how often someone sees a body leaving a silhouette against the orange light, how the fleeting moment strikes the city awake and disappear again. into silence. No one has to love the city or be planning to leave for a vacation to be remembered after. Instead of lighting a candle, I build a door that never opens unless there are grounds on both sides for the feet to walk on and never float adrift again. The subway is for you. The light flickers. The door opens. Now go. Eruption. In front of the black wave, I am thinking about a man who took his shirt off and waved the flag at the Winter Olympics. The same day I watch a birthday party where excited fingernails unravel a tsunami cake. Blue waves flood the white sand at the initial shock. Two aftershocks follow. Pink balls floating over the blue and the blackish purple that glitters. I count the teeth on their smiling faces as they turn into blocks of floating buildings on Japanese shores. Tsunami, run. Against the gray water, the yellow letter glisten. Remember, the cloud blooms like a concentric flower and withers on the flat screen in front of my eyes, all of it, much like the island that once was two, that became one and fleetingly gone. He smiles, will gorge on the cake as the ashes gorged the island into none. Maybe there will be a ring on the bottom of the seabed. Maybe someone will be beautifully united. Maybe someone will be found. I wonder what is underneath today. Clippings. I don't know when the haunting started to get real. Was it when we laid our foot on this soil away from our origin? Or is it that the real started to get haunting? Did it begin to turn inside out under our giddy grips, genteel hands relieving the tension, smoothing every rugged terrain on your back? Amidst the scent of paraffin, did the haunting get real? Or in the mountains of dead skin cells accumulated as we peel, did it begin to unravel layer after layer, something unseen? Did we saturate it to fight through the cracks, to haunt us? Did the haunting infuse into the real as we kneel down to the toenails soaked in oil for strengthening keratin? Did we knowingly nourish the haunting to grow into the real? Or did we mother it into flesh, heal its open wounds through the warmth of our skin? Did we attend to haunting to become self-sufficiently real? My favorite poet pleads, America, you need to feel the hurt. America, do you feel clean? It's not that the haunting got real or the real got haunting. It's all hauntingly real. Thank you.
Thank you, Dabin. He's probably asleep right now. With this time difference, but it's wonderful that we get international contribution. I think we have next up is Ong Lin, who will be sharing with us 2 poems. And let me fix my PowerPoint here so that we can have it actually correct as to the program.
Hello. Yeah, I want to read 2 poems in this event. And the first poem is written by myself, and the second poem is written by a young lady poet, Pamani. So I want to read both of these 2 poems in 2 versions. I'm originally from Burma, Myanmar. So I just want to read the Burmese language first and then in English language. Now I'm going to read the first poem. The title of the first poem is One Day. So I will read first in Burmese version and then in English. တနေ့နေ့ချစ်ချင်းမြတ်တာတွေကိုငါတို့တောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့ကြည်စံတွေကိုသာငါတို့ရခဲ့ကြတယ်။ယုံကြည်မှုတွေကိုတောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့ အမုန်းတရားတွေကိုသာငါတို့ရခဲ့ကြတယ်တရားမျှတခြင်းတွေကိုငါတို့တောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့မတရားမှုတွေကိုသာရရှိခဲ့ကြတယ်တစုံတရာကိုငါတို့တောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့ဘာမှပြန်မရလိုက်ခြင်းနဲ့သာအဆုံးသတ်ခဲ့ရတယ်ဂုဏ်သိက္ခာတွေကိုငါတို့တောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့ကြောက်ရွံ့ဖွယ်ရာအိမ်မက်ဆိုးတွေသာပြန်ရခဲ့ကြတယ်။လှပတဲ့ဇလံတစ်ပုဒ်ကိုငါတို့တောင်းဆိုခဲ့ကြပေမဲ့ပြင်းထန်တဲ့စိတ်ဒဏ်ရာတွေသာငါတို့ပိုင်ဆိုင်ခဲ့ကြရတယ်။တခါတရံတော့ငါတို့တောင်းဆိုဖို့စိတ်ပြတ်မိပါတယ်။ဒါပေမဲ့မဆုံးသေးတဲ့ခရီးတစ်ခုအတွက်ထက်ခါတောင်းဆိုကြရအောင်ပါပဲ။တနေ့နေ့ရောက်တဲ့အထိပေါ့ I'm going to read in English translation. One day, we ask for love, but we get bullets. We ask for trust, but we get hatred. We ask for fairness, but we get distrust. We ask for something, but we get nothing. We ask for human dignity, but we get horrible tragedy. We ask for beautiful drama, but we get the serious trauma. Sometimes we are feeling energy to ask for, but we will be asking for again and again until one day. Now I will continue to read the second poem. This poem is honoring to the women, including young and old women who courageously have participated in the anti-military coup resistance in Myanmar. Since February 1st, 2021, the military coup happened in Myanmar. During the peaceful protest, many women were leading in the front line of the Spring Revolution in different ways. The title of this poem is Sarong Revolution. Sarong is called in Burmese, we call Longji and Tamay. It means wraparound clothes that women in Myanmar are used to wearing as the skirt. This poem is written by a young lady poet, Pamani. So you can also see some picture here that mention about women courageously participate in the Spring Revolution. So I also read this poem in two versions. I will read in Burmese first and then in English. Tamay alan to wear. Lene myago ko lane ko tin. စေရထားကိုထမိန်အလံထူပြီးလင်္ကာဒီပတစ်ခုလုံးကိုဒူးထောက်စေတဲ့တော်လန်ရေးတအူးကနတ်ဖျားတီတာတွေဝီတွေအချင်းပေါင်းတစ်ပန်းဟာလက်နက်ကင်အကြမ်းဖက်တွေကိုငံပြာရည်ငရုတ်တီးနဲ့ဆက်ဖြင်းဖြင်းရောသမမွေတယ်တနက်ခါပကွက်ကြားကြီးတွေဟာမတရားပါရိုက်တဲ့လက်ဖွားတွေကိုအယိုးသားဆုံးအပြုံးတွေနဲ့အာခံလို့ငါတို့အားလုံးဟာမုံရွာအချင်းပေါင်းတွေဖြစ်တယ်တနက်ပြောင်းကိုရဲရဲကြည့်ပြီးမြစ်တာတရားနဲ့ထောက်ချလိုက်တဲ့ဒူးအစုံဟာတရေဘောကြောင့်မှုနဲ့တတိအကြားတတိုင်းကြီးလို့မိုးထိုးခဲ့တယ်မြစ်ကြီးနားဗဟိုချက်ကနေကမ္ဘာစာမျက်နှာတွေကိုဆူနာမီငလျင်တစ်ခုလိုလှိုင်းထကင်လှုပ်သွားတယ်ငါတို့အားလုံးဟာ Sister M Rosary ဖြစ်တယ်ထမင်းကြိုက်လေးတစ်လုံးဆွဲတနေ့လုံးမှတနေ့စားရတဲ့မရှိမဲ့လစာလေးတွေကိုရဲရဲတောက်စွန့်လွတ်ငက်ချင်မငက်ရောတကောင်ထက်ညှိနှက်အောင်မလားအာနာရှင်ကိုရှေ့ဆုံးကထွက်တော်လန့်တယ်ငါတို့အားလုံးဟာနေ့စားအလုပ်သမားတွေဖြစ်တယ်တန်စလုံးတစ်လုံးကိုလက်မောင်းပြုတ်လူမြဝလုံးနဲ့အားရပါရတီးမတရားမှုကိုအပါထုတ်တဲ့ရှစ်နာရီဒေါသမျက်ရည်တွေဟာအာနာဖီဆန်မှုပုံရိပ်တွေအဖြစ်တစိမ့်တုံးလို့ရှိုင်းနှက်ခဲ့တယ်ငါတို့အားလုံးဟာတန်ဖုံးတီးအန်တီကြီးတွေဖြစ်တယ်သပင်တွေဖြူသွားတွေကျိုးလဲဇာကမညိုးကျွေးကြော်သံတွေအာကောင်ချစ်ရင်တပိတ်စစ်ကြောင်းရှေ့ဆုံးကနေထမိန်တူတူမန်ပါချီတက်တယ်ငါတို့အားလုံးဟာလက်သုံးချောင်းထောင်အဖွားအိုတွေဖြစ်တယ်ဝမ်းနဲ့လွယ်ထားရတဲ့တရေရောဝမ်းနဲ့လွယ်မွေးထားရတဲ့ကိုရင်သွေးရောသူများဝမ်းကထွက်တဲ့ဒဇိန်သားသမီးတွေပါမကြံတ the Dwede, the Dade, the Bota, Engani, Shiko, no set, Tokwa Jaduri, in the Gago, Pink, Hachuzo Yaduri, Engo Piamalana, and Ero Dureja, Naru Aloha, Azani, Mikin repeated. Alo simply Dwama Sure, Menali Shadanga, Sako Neseduji, Amen with a Madwine, a pay the Kunet, pay the Kut the Midaku Jaga, Mita Diariga, the Nangan Lo yet now see reader, Gizanlo, Piquin Dware. Naru Aloha, Julian Dware, Jason repeated. Naru Aloha, Jo Asa Chase so, Jean Zone Tame Elandrine, Aga Mayma repeated. Lene Yago, Kulane Gutin, say a tago Tame Elan to be, Anna, you jump at the Marigo, don't load 2,000 yame, ne udolan ita uga, napaya tiade we. So I'm going to read in English. Surround revolution. Holding the arrow and bow with your own hand, raising surround flags on their chariots. They bring the anti-terrorist groups to kneel. At the front line of the Spring Revolution stood the cedar goddess. With a tray of bigger fruits, she dared to stare the armed terrorists with fish salt and hot chili flake. Beating the mixture wall, for the spikes to soak in, thick layer of the nacre on her cheeks, defying the pen of the police who strikes her face unjustly. Smiling a big smile so generally, she'll defy the injustice. We all manifest in ourselves the Moya bigger fruit lady. Fearlessly looking her eyes with the rifle pointed at her. The kneel that fell with loving kindness rose as a tower that divides between courage and cruelty, sending across the tsunami earthquakes from Michina epicenter to the headline of the war. We all manifest in ourselves, Sister Anne Rosa. With different brows, with hand, working for a day wage to eat a day meal, they bravely give us the manly wave they barely have in hand, might as well starve. No night deeper than midnight. Revolving the journey from the front line, we all manifest in ourselves fearless garment walker. Banning pots and pan with a long bamboo stick, with the strength that could break arms apart every night, 8 o'clock and rain tear to exorcise evil are now the symbol of defiance against tyranny. We all manifest in ourselves the aunties who bang in pots and pan. White hair, teeth broken, but the courage not yet wither, shouting slogan from the top of their lamp, wearing the sarong tight and short, marching from the very front with resolve and resolute. We all are grammar three-finger race. Chines carry in the world, chines born out of her own, chines born from a stranger womb. She worry for them all as if they are of the same flesh and blood. The youth paying homage before leaving home, those who need temporary home, and those who will never return home. She welcomed them all. We all are mothers. Everything will be okay. The manly 19 years old lady from the front line hero assured all of us. The love between father and daughter, a story full of dream and daring, sent a bullet through the net of the entry nation. We are all fallen star magazine. Wearing colorful tame and different fabrics, we all are phenomenal women at the front line of winning this revolution. Holding the arrows and bow with their own hands, raising surround flags from our chariots, we will bring the anti-terrorist council to kneel at the front line of the Spring Revolution. We will stand as cedar goddess. Thank you all.
Great. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Those are all amazing. We might go a little bit over time for this session, but we'll definitely take a break before the next. Our next screening is by a poet who could not be here, but she did write an introduction that I will read aloud for her. So Janine Hanawi is a second-year Islam and interreligious engagement active student at Union and a queer Afro-Arab Muslim. Her poetry often reflects her ceaseless grappling with Islamophobia, or her nuanced love for God, or the revelations, demonization, and destabilization of her past substance addictions. Whether she is writing poetry for the page or poetry for the stage, Janine just seeks to feel better about herself and about a world that is so cunningly rewrites itself in every moment. But she would like this bio to be about you too. She values every second of your attention that you spare to watch, listen to, or read her poetry. She bears witness to any strife you are carrying, and she sees you in the darkest of darks. And she celebrates both your highest joy and your rugged trek to claim it. Above all, she begs you to always have hope no matter the wreckage. And specifically about this piece, Mama, I Don't Mean to Complain About This is a poem that confronts a few episodes of cutting Islamophobia that both I and my mother have faced over the years. It is a poem that introduces itself with timidity and offhandedness, but soon swells with resentment, confusion, and hurt. Among the medley of other emotions that overtake Muslims in those moments where our humanity is questioned, or our identity is marred, or our safety is jeopardized. We know this too well. We shouldn't have to know what this is. Please let the unbridled tumult and blooming hope of this poem allow you to see yourself in another, or grant you peace from persistent pain, or nudge you to new knowledge. Thank you so much, friends.
Mama, I don't mean to complain about this, but I'm thinking about when you were a kid, how you scissored apart the living room curtain to fashion a scarf, then draped the cloth about your head and suddenly knew who you were. The neighborhood white boys chased you up the block, tossing rocks and cussing. The curtain loosened from your head and whipped away, flailed under their pounding sneakers like a truce they wouldn't make. You kicked up so much dirt in your wake that they swore you would lift it into nothing. Mama, I don't mean to complain about this, but I'm thinking about the whiskey-soured man who flirted with me on the train, then initiated some boozy ruckus about political nothings. He said, "You hear about Trump yesterday? About surveilling the place where the Muslims pray?" "Mosque," I corrected. He shrugged and sighed. "I mean, it sucks, but we got to keep an eye on them. They got, like, ideas going on in there." I caught my hard reflection in the window, imagined my face pixelated, wondered if the cameras would be fixed toward Mecca. Mama, he leaned closer and asked me my name, and a flame ignited in my throat before I replied, "Nothing I want you to repeat." Mama, I don't mean to complain about this, but I'm thinking about your teenage years at Taco Bell. The salat you sought to fulfill, but your boss always willed you back to work. You prayed in the bathroom, bumped your head on the sink. Customers knocked on the door between rakat, waiting to relieve themselves in the same place you had to make a sacred space. The boss kept saying, "Adrian, no praying right now. Handle the register, Adrian. You want to pray? Pray over the counter. It needs wiping." He shortened your lunch breaks, thinned the minutes you'd begged to keep. You forcibly traded divine conversation for doormat sweeping. Mama, I don't mean to complain about this, but I'm thinking about the grocery store in the village. I was gently singing some old Arabic tune as I perused the aisles when I glimpsed the shopkeepers trailing after me. Never close enough to warrant my objection, but never distant enough to not make the connection. I'm well versed in the mathematics of stereotype and fear. Arabic song upon unfamiliarized ears. Arabic meant Muslim to them, and Muslim meant dangerous intentions. They followed me like I was bomb-burdened beneath my shirt, like I bore some fictitious agenda to render their shop a fountain of fire. I walked in tense acceptance, winding between shelves like a run-on sentence. I stopped singing. I didn't want to stop singing. Mama, I don't mean to complain about this, but I'm thinking about the time that Trump won. You worked at the school library with two friends, Rosa, a Muslima, and Annie O, a Fox News tape recorder. Annie O bounced into the library that morning and announced, "Ladies, it's finally time to make America great again." Rosa shouted, "Why don't you call my crying kids at home and explain to them why their president doesn't love them?" And Mama, you tightened your grip on your cart full of books, the look on Rosa's face, third degree scathing, and all you could say was, "Annie, please, But Mama, do let me complain about the stone-eyed man on the subway who rose up behind me and snatched my hijab partway off the back of my head. Mama, help me understand how God would craft from clay the hand that gathered the seams of my veil in its fist and tugged. Sometimes I want to be this, but I don't want to be this. Sometimes I want some holy bliss, and sometimes I want to be wholly missing from it. We've crushed so many sacred phrases between our teeth. Let neither of our jaws speak the insha'Allahs. We folded our hijabs into purses before job interviews, and inside us are invisible hearses carrying to rest the parts of us we wanted. Sometimes I picture us in this room, Mama, where the floorboards are all of the things that doomed us. As we walk, they bend in hostile angles. This wooden geography beneath us all at once falls apart, sprawling its animosity in a cavernous slant, and we try to run, but we can't, so we just fall. But every basement has a staircase. And in my imagination, Mama, we find it. Climbing step by step, we begin to surround ourselves with people who inquire about our assalamu alaikums and our Allahu Akbars, who don't liken the latter with hijacked planes plunging into oceans, people who are eager to touch the depths of our golden. Step by step, we talk, Mama, of the man who ripped off my hijab. You tell me you would have beaten him senseless endlessly. Of the boys who chased you, I say you would have had a friend in me. We learn even from the would-haves. Step by step, I tuck my hair into scarves again. You still won't wear your brown hijabs, but you say that when I leave home with my hair disguised, it feels to you like some vicarious pleasure, like a home you thought you'd severed, still there, still something you hope to come back to. And I believe that in time we will see a door, Mama, as we climb. I won't know where it leads, but we'll catch the slits of light beaming from its crevices. And Mama, just before touching the knob, we'll beg, most compassionate, most merciful, whatever awaits us beyond this place, just let it be good to us. Please, let it be good.
Okay, that concludes our poetry and music section. So how long should we take? Maybe we can come back at 4:15? 4:15. All right, so you're welcome to do whatever you want, and we'll return at 4:15 for a panel with all of our art. Well, not all of our artists, but some of our artists.
We need 3 more. Well, 4 more. How you doing? That's too loud.
being able to be, vocal in that sense, to be able to communicate a marginalized perspective through an artistic practice, whether that's dance or through zine making, has become a really critical part of my kind of position as an artist, which is something that I never thought was going to happen when I was a 12-year-old emo kid being forced into this Bollywood class, in suburban Michigan by my mom. So that's like, yeah, kind of serendipitous how that all ended up working out. It feels a little bit like my trajectory has sort of come full circle. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I recommend taking a look at the zine. It's actually pretty amazing. So my name is Laura Sasaki Norton, and I just added this Sasaki part a couple of months ago because I've had 4 European names. I'm a mixed race Japanese American, and it's a great question you asked, Shanaz. How does my AAPI or Asian American identity figure into my art? Some of the art I've done is the calligraphy and painting back there. So I think what it has done is for the first, maybe like 25 or 30 years that I was doing my art, I was creating art against my identity as an Asian American, as the white supremacy, internalized white supremacy was so strong, and it's something that's really new for me to come out and realize, the Asian American side, the Asian side is also beautiful, and it comes out in my art. I had a friend comment to me something about the Asian influence in my art, and I was kind of offended. And actually now I'm seeing like, no, that's the beauty of it. There is actually beauty in the Japanese side that I don't know much about, that I'm learning about. And so it's calligraphy, it's using acrylic and watercolor and fabrics and windows and just kind of all kinds of different media. Because I'm not somebody that feels like a person who is well-spoken, I'm not a preacher, that kind of thing, I'm not a singer. My voice has always been kind of a quiet visual voice. And I've had a calling, I feel, to speak out for justice. So some of the work that I've done here and within my body of work is trying to remind myself and those around me that we are called to be people for justice, that our art can be a voice, just like music or singing or dance can be a voice. And so how it relates to the theme of visible, vibrant, vocal, in the Asian American community, oftentimes there's a feeling that we're invisible, that we're to be quiet in the background. So this day is about us becoming more visible and vibrant. The vibrancy is here. We see it in all of the artists. And the vocal part is in the context of a lot of anti-Asian violence that we've experienced all our lives, and more so recently. I think this part where we're being vocal in the ways that we can is really, really important. And I'm really grateful for everybody who's helped to put on this event. So thank you.
I actually really resonate with what you say about visibility and, our backgrounds, because, hi, my name is Fatma. Just to, start off right, I created those 2 paintings over there, and my work is literally about South Asian visibility. And I grew up in Pakistan, and I didn't really question my South Asian identity, obviously, until I moved here, when I learned what it truly was to be a minority. Back in Pakistan, I was just an angry feminist, and now, I have both things to be angry about. So I think from a very young age, I've always been interested in portraiture, because it's like this weird, controversial subject matter, especially when it comes to portraits of women and images of women's bodies. It's a very politicized subject in Pakistan. And I've always had a lot of issues against the policing of women's faces, their bodies, their femininity, how they adorn themselves, how they choose to dress. And all the different ways in which women are told what to do and what not to do. And I think my work is basically about those different structures of patriarchy, and each of my portraits of women kind of like confront those different aspects. And I like to add a little bit of humor to it as well. Sometimes they're very deep in, you know, like narrative. Sometimes they're, and I think like the two paintings that I have up today are like those two opposite ends of the type of work that I like to make. And just to give a little bit more background on what I do, I've been living in New York City since 2016. Before that, I studied museum studies and painting at Bennington College. So when I moved to New York, I was really trying to find community and trying to serve particularly the South Asian feminist community. And I'm currently on the board of the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, where I've had the pleasure of organizing many programs and giving a platform to many South Asian female and femme-identifying creatives, which has then inspired my own work. So it's basically just these like collective of experiences and stories and narratives and different like controversial topics in feminism that I like to paint about and describe specifically through portraiture. And I just like having giant paintings of brown women in the room because I feel like there aren't enough. So that's me.
Thank you. My name is Moses Shanti Kumar, and I originally come from India. And I'm a pastor of Church of South India and currently serving a UCC church in the Bronx. With regard to my artwork, basically I'm a singer and a songwriter. And I have been writing songs from the time I started my theological education back in 2004. And I initially started off writing devotional bhajans. It's basically, a form of singing wherein the leader sings and the congregation sings the echo part. And then most of my songs have been towards encouraging alternative spirituality, and writing songs itself has been a spiritual practice for me. And with regard to the theme, I was really excited to see the theme because, as people coming from Asian and other Pacific Islanders, I think our presence is invisible, and sometimes this invisibility kind of, leads to violence, perpetuates violence. And today I would like to acknowledge that, this is the first time that my work has been projected, and I would really like to thank API caucus at Union for, making this space available for us to showcase. And as one of the Mexican artists says, the only difference between a madman and a artist is the latter has audience. So today I'm glad that I have audience who have witnessed my work. And another thing about visibility is most of our work is not visible, and it is thrown or it is lying dormant in our closets or in our rooms. But today, you see so much of art being exhibited over here, and we are so very glad that we are able to rescue and retrieve the art that has been, invisible as such, So I would really like to thank AAPI caucus for this wonderful platform. Yes, we can. And another important aspect that I felt was very important is we were given the full freedom. I remember Shalom telling me, like, you will have the full direction, full license, and, you can basically direct, the kind of work that you want to do. So there are no terms and conditions for your work being accepted or rejected, So we were given that freedom, so which we hardly, have it. So I would really like to thank. And with regard to the vocal part, my work, I have incorporated the consciousness of the earth, bringing in the voices of the earth and earth creatures into my singing. It's not that that I am kind of giving voice, but then just trying to realize and have a consciousness towards the groaning of the earth and also, the groaning of the creatures. And I would like to thank my professors at United Theological College, Bangalore, and here at Union, Dr. Claudio, who has been, encouraging me to pay attention to the earth and the earth creatures and listen to their voices. So I think, it's important that we pay attention to the voices of our fellow beings and more than human beings, which is so very important at this moment. And once again, I would like to thank all of you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hello. Okay. Hi, I am Errol de los Santos. I use he, him pronouns. I am of Filipino descent. And it's funny because I was talking about this question the other day, and I asked a colleague, like, what if they ask me this? Like, what am I supposed to say? I only do my artwork to give myself joy, to experience happiness in it and the actual creating of it. How am I going to connect that to my identity as a person who identifies as AAPI? And he said something very wise. He said, well, in a nation that fosters these systems of oppression, the ones that that ignore you, dismiss you, and cast you aside, experiencing joy is very subversive. And experiencing happiness, knowing that there are systems who don't want you to experience that, is worthwhile to do. You can do art for that, and if it's just for that, that's worthwhile doing. And yeah, so that's going to be my answer. And I'm happy to have this event to show the things that I love doing. And I've only just started working with stained glass about 2.5 years ago. I really enjoy it. And I think when I think of vibrancy, I think of light coming in through glass and showing these beautiful colors to tell a message, to show an image, to tell a story, yeah. So thank you.
All right, thank you for those lovely introductions. I have artist-specific questions that we might not be able to get through all, but I'll probably run through those until 5, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A for the last 15 minutes or so. So is there any artist here that wants to hear their question first? You'll go first? Okay, thanks. Okay. So also, like during this part of this panel, you can also feel free to respond to each other and ask your questions. I'd like to talk as little as possible. So, Xiao, under your collection, Recent Thoughts, the description states, Smile's understanding of love is what led her to create art. And do you mind elaborating on that source of love and how you've held on to that when dealing with sensitive and upsetting issues?
That's such a good question. Thank you for reading my statement in the first place. It's very nice. When I first write this statement, I just felt like nobody's ever gonna read my artist statement. But anyways, we're here. I feel that it has changed a lot, definitely. When I first started officially making art, love was such a big idea for me, is that everything comes from love and it goes away with love, and God is love and love is everywhere and it's in little details and everything. So I think about it a lot. And as I grow a little older throughout time, started taking photos, it changed a lot. And right now, I wouldn't say I'm that optimistic about it as I used to be when I first write this statement. It is still in my bones, but it's not on my skin anymore. And your question is that how does it shape my understanding? Right now it's very difficult. I think it's always within little daily moments, details of interactions, such as light, like look behind there, that's love, I think. Or when you're sick, your friend come to your room and give you water and food. Or it's just someone helping me to set things up when I'm here. Or friends coming to see my show and those things. It's not really anything too big to describe. It's just an action. It's like, yes, I experienced it. I felt warm. It's a nice feeling. Thank you. And that's something about photography, is that it captures moments, right? Like, so these moments are usually hangouts with people, and they're not really projects, they're hangouts. They're like, I am getting to know you in this very intimate way, that I'm this intimidating photographer that uses my lens to point at you and like, you be there and don't look at me and just look further. And that's really intimate, and that is love for me. And thank my models for doing that, and thank my viewers for seeing them, and thank people for listening to me. I think this is an act of love, that we have patience for each other, and you're seeing my work. So that's love, I think. Yeah.
Who wants their question?
Do you want to just go down the line?
Sure. Okay, so for me, I'm glad you mentioned Full Faith in Color, because my question is about that. Could you describe how that project emerged and how you choose which voices to elevate, and some of the insights of how you navigate some power relations in editing that?
Ooh, that's a great question. Yeah, so the story of Faith in Full Color. So right before the pandemic started, I had the privilege of receiving some grant money from Interfaith Youth Corps, which is a fiscal sponsor of this event and is also my full-time employer. So thanks, Interfaith Youth Corps. And yeah, I had that money earmarked for a training here at Union when I was a student here on religious bias. But then the pandemic happened and we all, were in lockdown suddenly. And I still had this money, and at the start of the pandemic, especially here in New York City, but also around the country, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, just seeing how powerfully folks were showing up for the movement for Black Lives was, you know, it's a moment that continues to be a source of great pain for Black people and other people of color. And I was able to see during the start of that, a huge community of artists emerging to use their platforms to talk about issues of racism and prejudice through their lens and through their medium. And I had been talking to folks about zine making for quite some time. One of my good friends who is also a dance instructor at the company that I work at is a zine curator and hosts galleries at Chinatown Soup downtown. And so I was thinking about, like, you know, I have this community of artists. A lot of them are performing artists, but we have visual artists and writers and folks who have a really particular perspective and are coming from marginalized, in many marginalized identities intersecting, right? That do not, unfortunately, in most art spaces here, they just don't have access to the visibility, they don't have access to the funding, they don't have access to the platforms to be able to speak truth to power through their art. And so I wanted to put together a publication that was specifically for those folks who are pushed out of white elitist artist spaces, who have a faith-based orientation, who you know, who deserve more than anything a platform in order to communicate their unique perspective on issues of racial justice or the earth, or any other, you know, topic of liberation that you can think of. So, you know, as we were sifting through, like during our first call for submissions, and identifying folks who are the right fit to include, it was very much about, like, who have I as an artist not seen in artist spaces so far in my life? And how can I make sure that folks who are submitting their work to this zine project are being uplifted? Like, if I, as a person who's at several marginalized identities, are not seeing these people, then like they're definitely like systematically being pushed out of artist spaces. And so that's been a huge part of the kind of methodology, I guess, I could kind of take in selecting submissions, and understanding too that certain issues of, you know, liberation and struggle are really intimate for specific communities, right? Like racial justice, you know, that volume 1 of the zine on racial justice was emerged after the murder of a Black man. So I have to make sure that Black folks have the very first and like highest platform in the zine to be able to express not only their grief, but their power and the potential for this movement. And, you know, in our second volume on land and space, making sure that Indigenous folks and other folks who have direct spiritual connections to land and water have the ability to communicate that through their artistic medium. So I think I answered that question.
Hey, Laura. So I have the privilege of taking classes with Laura. So in one of them, when she presented her work for the first time, at least in front of me, she likened her work to visual preaching. And I was wondering if you can elaborate what that term means to you.
Yes, thank you. Coming to a seminary where a lot of folks are getting a Masters of Divinity and they're speaking and preaching, and that's a skill and an aptitude that I don't share. I'm not really, like I said, not really so much of a speaker, but I do think that there is power in the visual. We can hear, we can listen to what people are saying, which is one powerful way of getting a message. But for me, as I said before, the visual, I think, has an impact on our bodies when we encounter something visual with the color, the composition. And for me, what I focus on is words, and I believe there's real power in words. So words that are spoken, clearly, there's an idea that words that are spoken actually have a physical presence. So we are all kind of wrapped in these words, so we be careful of what words we say. But I think in a similar way, words that are written out with attention, and that attention can make the words or letters really beautiful, or they could make them very express anger. They don't have to be beautiful, but they are just a way of conveying, information or protest or lament or joy in a way that I think is a form of visual preaching, in that, the preacher preaches out of their own experience, and they're trying to convey something of maybe love or hope to their congregations. But through the visual, I think I'm trying to express, I think kind of like Errol said, I'm just having so much joy in the actual making of the letters, the paintings, the silk, whatever I'm working with. And hopefully that comes through, because every breath that I take sort of comes through in the writing. We all do handwriting, and I just think we've gotten so used to computer fonts, which are also lovely and beautiful oftentimes, but there's something about the written word that comes from a human body, where my breath is coming in and out comes letters. I think that there's something really powerful for that. So the subject matter for me oftentimes is something that's sort of justice related. For example, so I do paintings that are more frameable, that kind of thing, but also in the uprising after the murder of George Floyd, what could I do? I did protest signs, basically, or signs of lament, or signs calling for justice. And those were just hand-lettered poster board signs. And my idea was that, at least it's something coming from a human being, because you can see that it's just hand-lettered. And I think there's some power in that. That is a different kind of power from the ones that are printed, mass printed. So it's just another kind of voice. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Fatima, I also stalked your website. So in your bio, you write, I often find myself questioning South Asian femininity and features as they compare to West, and demand attention to these questions. So could you describe some of those questions you've explored and how they've changed over time?
The first thing that comes to mind is like the specific features of South Asian women that I think at some point were looked down upon, which I feel like in recent popular culture are now revered, like having thicker eyebrows or thicker hair, or like having sharp cheekbones, which, growing up, it was like, that's manly, or that's unattractive, or that's unfeminine, when that was just something natural to South Asian femininity, which exists separate of what is happening in the West and has for thousands of years. But of course, South Asia is a post-colonial community where a lot of, the trauma of 300 and something years of colonization have like left a very deep impact in the mentality of people that exist there. Here is like, it's like different because you are South Asian as a minority amongst like in a Western country where you're surrounded by white people. But then when you are from South Asia and you're constantly told that these people abroad are better than you and better looking than you and like have a better system and they're like civilized and, have access to all these things, I think that's something that I had to really think about when I came here, because I feel like a lot of those like Western standards of beauty were like a myth. It wasn't even real. It wasn't even like a lot of those people were practicing it. And like, I specifically remember my whole life having to get like everything waxed, especially your arms. Like, you weren't allowed to have hairy arms ever. And then I came here and all the white girls had hairy arms. And I was like, what the hell? I thought you guys were the ones telling us. So, that's one example. The other is like minimalism and the beauty of like just wearing something that's plain white or like a plain black outfit, whereas our culture like physically cannot comprehend minimalism. Like, it's just not a thing. And we have very like garish colors, loud, vibrant, bold ways of expressing our beauty and our culture. And you know, a lot of that then coming here is like, oh, that's, you know, that's like fobby, or that's backwards, or that's not, you know, what's in these days. And I feel like I've just tried to think and reject that in a lot of my paintings in a different way. Like, just, it's not like everything at once. It's like one painting is about something in particular.
All right, Moses. You mentioned consciousness of the earth in your introduction, and I was wondering if you can elaborate how that emerges in your songwriting. And also, I'm curious of how you hold on to that sentiment in a very like capitalistic, materialistic world.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, basically, I started off my research with regard to my consciousness toward the earth in my master's program, wherein I did my research on the topic green singing for a green church, wherein I kind of saw the ecological bankruptcy that is present in most of our hymns, traditional hymns. And also you see more of a triumphalistic and escapist spirituality that, you know, you find in most of our traditional hymns, like, you know, Onward Christian Soldiers, and, you know, you call, like, you know, there are so many which have a militaristic and triumphalistic and also otherworldly spirituality, basically, you know, neglecting the earth. And instead of making a paradise here on the earth, we think of another otherworldly life and aspire to be, you know, heavenward and all of that. So, so basically challenging those notions, I propose, like, you know, alternative songs which basically take into consideration the groaning of the earth and also the ecological catastrophe that is present. So I try to kind of transform some of those traditional hymns, like, you know, I have changed the lyrics, and in some cases I have written my own songs which are earth-based, and also challenging the capitalistic notion of a fast-paced world, and, you know, challenging us to kind of slow down and, you know, walk in the pace of the animals and the little children, like crawling and, you know, walking slowly, and basically a kind of spirituality that challenges the capitalistic notions. And now I'm trying to see as to how we can identify some of the voices of the earth, and, you know, paying attention to the creatures, the birds, you know, all the animals, and see as to how I could bring that into my music. Recently for Easter, I have produced a song. Basically in that I wanted to incorporate the singing of the birds. So I brought in the chirping and, you know, the singing of the birds into my song. So if you check my song, you will find the birds singing all through the song from intro to the end. So, I mean, these are very small ways that, you know, I'm trying to kind of develop my own consciousness and also pay attention to the creatures. And yeah, thank you.
All right, last question before we open up to the audience, but I eavesdropped on a conversation you had with Laura, and Laura had alluded to how hard it is to work with glass and stained glass. So I'm curious of like, what motivates you to keep working with stained glass, and are there any particular themes that continue to appear in your work?
No real pattern of themes, but I just feel like glass. I love the way texture and color and shapes can appear in glass that mimic natural things. like mottled leaves and rays of the sun. And I love how they can be formed to create beautiful, elaborate pieces. And although I'm not at that skill level, I do feel like I would love to get there because of just that. Because it can do something. It can tell a story. It can be a source of beauty or inspiration. Working with glass is difficult for me. I do cut myself a lot. I will burn myself on the solder, but it doesn't take away from the joy of seeing a final product. It doesn't take away from the joy of, having people look at it and then feel something. So that's why I continue to work in this medium. Thank you. And thank you for your questions. Because these are very good questions. Yeah.
All right. Let's open it up to the audience. I'm going to steal 15 minutes from dinner, but I think it's worth it for these wonderful artists. So do we have any questions? We'll pass the mic around. Pearl, I'll run to you.
Thank you all for letting us better understand your art by taking the time to talk with us about it. And in that vein, I think sometimes the most impactful elements of a piece, or the element that took the most work, is sometimes so well integrated that we as the observers don't recognize it. And I also would just love to hear you all brag a little bit about yourselves. So I'm curious if there is an element that you worked particularly hard on in your work, or if there is an element that you're most proud of that you could talk about.
And maybe we can have like 2 artists respond to it, and then we'll take another question from the audience.
Thank you, Pearl, for that question. It just made me think about, for me, the technical element of learning different, techniques, whether it's painting or different calligraphy hands or styles or techniques. Those are difficult, and they take some attention to, take some time to learn how to do those. But for me, the thing that I think that's the most difficult as a recovering perfectionist is realizing if I'm working on a piece, and maybe you all feel this way too, as I'm working on a piece, if I feel like I kind of like what's happening and I really like it, the next time I put my paint down or my ink down feels like a big risk to me, because it's just easy to ruin the thing. And I wonder if it's similar to maybe if you're a dancer and you're really good at what you do, but then on stage, you don't know what's going to happen. You've got to take a risk to do that amazing move. So that's what it feels like for me to do that. And I catch myself in those moments saying, oh, I really like this. I could ruin everything. And I just have to do it, have to go forward in it. For me, that's the most difficult. Liking it and going, I could ruin it, but let's jump in and see what happens.
Okay, I'll respond to that too, because I want to piggyback on what you said, Laura, about perfectionism. If you look at the stained glass that's there, the larger piece, it's not completed. And I struggled a little bit with that because I wanted to have a finished piece here. But I realized that that's not its final form, right? It's gonna change, it's gonna move. Even when I feel like it's gonna be perfect, it's not gonna stay where it's gonna be. It's gonna be owned by someone, or it could break and it could end up somewhere else in pieces. So that's how I reckoned with that perfectionism. And just to say that this isn't the final form, or it doesn't take away from how hard I worked on it, how much I got out of it, and how much light it brings to other people. So Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Come on.
They gave us so much material to work with.
And I'm sure that every single one of you can answer this question, but what do you do when you hit one of those spots where you can't do anything? What happens? How do you move past that?
If you feel like you can't do something art related, art making related, you literally have to do anything else. And that's what I did. When I moved to the city, I felt like I didn't have the right resources to be able to continue my work. So instead of making work, I tried to gather these experiences that then I could be more inspired to create work with. I just stopped. I'm a bad example. I went on hiatus for a long time, and I don't recommend that. But I think, and this is with anything in life, if you feel like you can't move forward with it, you literally have to just close it and continue doing something else. There's so many other projects that you can spend your time doing. And I feel like the more you try to push yourself to complete work, the less likely you are to be happy with the finished product. Because when you're an artist, this stuff comes to you naturally, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. And I'm sure everyone has different working experiences, but the best thing that you can do for yourself is stay true to who you are and pursue something that you can actually focus on rather than pushing yourself doing something that is just not going to come to you.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I say that, especially in my dance practice, when I'm choreographing a piece and I have a certain intention that I want to set for that piece, and a certain texture that I want to, come alive throughout the piece, if I hit a block, like a mental block, a creative block, community is the way that I always overcome that. One of the game changers for me as a choreographer was, getting into a studio with my friends who also dance and choreographing together. And it's not only a really fun way to pass the time, but also just, it feels so good to feel held by these people as we navigate that challenge, right? We're facing it together, and the stakes in the bigger picture are not very high for our choreography to be good or not, or to communicate what we want to communicate. But to be able to, pick up where, my best friend left off in that choreography, to finish that sort of physical embodied sentence, and finish each other's thoughts in that very it's a physical and it's a spiritual exercise, and being able to do that in community is so precious. I've come to appreciate that so much, especially in these pandemic times.
Well, I don't really have a question. I happen to be in New York for this week. I'm from Cleveland, and I just happened to find out about this. I feel so grateful. I would love to have an hours-long conversation with each of you. And I don't know, I'm not trying to speak for everybody else, but I want to sound brilliant or something. But I just want to express appreciation. And the reason that I'm having trouble, I think, formulating a question is that there's so much, and I would just love to have much more depth than I think I can formulate right now. That's just me. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Arrow, for the invitation to be here and to take in this. I was sharing with Arrow, I've been in New York City for 2 years, and I've only felt deeply connected twice, and the first time it was in action after the election. But I identify as 1/8 Chinese, and have, some proof of it from Ancestry.com, and just figuring out space and visibility and where is my Black Asian sort of loyalty. And I don't take up spaces in API communities, but I just, as religious leaders, right, I'm curious just to feel, some of the poetry just ripped me to shreds and talked about liberation. But learning from your pieces, sadly, I didn't get to see your dance and just how moving it is. But specifically as religious leaders, how do you share, how included is your work in the spaces that you embody outside of this context? Like how do you share of this would be a question.
Yeah. Yeah, as a religious leader, as a pastor, coming from Asian background, especially with regard to vibrancy that we have in the theme. I kind of, even with regard to the visibility part, as an immigrant, I feel like, sometimes I have experienced situations wherein I felt like I was an outsider. I was a person who is occupying somebody else's space, and I had a very terrible experience right after coming to the US, especially when I was sitting in a bus beside a person, who was yelling and shouting because there was a black man who was riding the bus, and he was shouting at that driver, and then he was kind of yelling at all the people who were in the traffic, in the sense like, he was shouting out and saying, you intruders coming over here and taking our space, and we don't have space over here. If I only had a gun, I would take and shoot everyone. So, he was kind of expressing his anger and swearing and talking to his wife over the phone, and describing the situation. And I was just sitting right beside him. So all the time that I was sitting there with him, it was a kind of a very terrible experience wherein, I felt like that I'm just intruding, into somebody's space, and as the other. So, and also, I could also point out to some of the experience wherein, as a leader, if you are an expert in a particular field, you're also seen as kind of cunningly wise, especially when it comes to finances and stuff like that. So, I could, basically tell you one after the other examples as to how sometimes you feel it in your body. And thank you.
I'll just say, like in my interfaith work, art I've come to understand my art, whether that's zine making or dance, as a way for me to like hold myself accountable for my faith commitments, because those practices are not, well, I don't see them directly a part of my faith practice. Like dance is not a part of my faith practice. It's not a liturgical thing. But, especially like Bhangra, which is a folk dance form from the region of South Asia that my ancestors are from, like that is a dance form that helps me connect to the earth and understand what it means to cultivate not only the earth, but to cultivate community. And that's a core part of my faith orientation as a member of the Sikh community. And as a zine maker with a commitment to uplifting the perspectives of marginalized artists, like that's very much in line with my faith commitments as someone who's a part of a community that consistently stands up for the oppressed and marginalized. I feel like I have a faith-based obligation in order to do that work through my art. But also in interfaith spaces, it is, it's hard for me to even to communicate how I, as someone who's from such a marginalized faith community all over the world, even in South Asia, Sikhs are persecuted. So navigating those spaces is, can be really, really difficult in a spiritual, emotional, even physical sense. Like I'm sometimes so physically tired by my work. But my art practice helps me sort of ground myself in how I feel connected to my ancestors particularly, and the sacrifices they made for me to be here today. So that's a huge part of that kind of replenishing process.
All right, I think we're going to close off the session now. So one more huge round of applause for the artists. All right, and hopefully they'll stick around so you can always ask your follow-up questions. Next, we have dinner and to-go boxes if you are fasting and need iftar later. Shalom's going to describe what food we have, but please stick around afterwards. We'll have a closing ceremony as well.
All right. Thank you, Shanaz. Thank you to the artists once more. Y'all don't have to stay. Go get food.